My name is Reese Langley. I'm 34 years old, and for the last decade, I've been quietly building something no one in my family ever asked about. Not once. Tonight, I sat at a long table under glass chandeliers, the kind that cost more than my first server rack. My brother Tyler's engagement dinner was a showcase of success. His success. The future doctor, Tyler Langley, and his picture-perfect fiancée, Madison Roth. She was poised, polished, radiant. My parents beamed at her like she was the long-awaited crown jewel. I was there too, sitting in a sleek black dress, hair swept back, hands calm even as the old silence wrapped around me like a second skin. No one asked what I'd been working on lately. No one mentioned my name in the toasts. Until Madison tilted her head slightly, fork halfway to her lips, and said across the linen-draped table, "Langley, wait. Reese Langley?" Her brow furrowed. I watched the moment her brain flipped through invisible mental files. "Vitalis Sync?" she said slowly. "Are you the founder of Vitalis?" The air shifted. Forks froze mid-air. My mother blinked like she'd heard wrong. My father stared across the table like he was seeing me for the first time in years. Even Tyler's jaw twitched. I set my champagne down. "Yes," I said evenly. Madison's eyes widened. "We've been negotiating with Vitalis Sync for weeks. Your platform is revolutionary." Silence. Tight. Electric. And then slowly, deliciously, recognition settled over the table like snowfall. I didn't gloat. I didn't flinch. Because that moment wasn't my victory. It was just the moment the room finally caught up. They had spent years pretending I was invisible. But tonight, the silence turned into something else. Wait. And this time, they felt it too. Growing up in the Langley household was like living inside a resume draft that was constantly being edited. The walls were lined with framed degrees, medical conference lanyards, legal plaques, and thick photo albums of achievements. Tyler's achievements. My parents, Dr. William Langley and Professor Meredith Langley, ran our home like a preparatory academy for exceptional futures. There were no bedtime stories, no family board games, no spontaneous pizza nights. There were check-ins, performance reviews, and long silences whenever I deviated from their blueprint. Tyler was the golden boy. Even when we were kids, he had that clinical clarity that made adults lean in. He wanted to be a surgeon since he was 10, and my parents took that as divine confirmation that their parenting model was flawless. I, on the other hand, once said I wanted to design a language that machines could understand. My mother blinked and said, "That's cute, Reese. Maybe you'll outgrow it." But I didn't. I grew deeper into it. By age 15, I had built a working scheduling system for our school nurse's office, an ugly interface, but it cut her manual load in half. She sent a thank you note home. My mother didn't mention it. Instead, she left a printed brochure for a pre-law internship on my desk. "Just in case," she wrote in perfect blue ink. My father nodded once and said, "It's time you started considering sustainable tracks." Sustainable. That word clung to me like static. What they meant was predictable, contained. Their version of success required prestige you could explain to donors and neighbors. Healthcare tech to them was vague, messy, and worse, risky. One morning, I slipped a piece of my Python code under my dad's newspaper. It was a logic structure I'd been working on for weeks, something I was proud of. He didn't even glance at it. Just folded the paper, pushed the code aside, and sipped his coffee. It would have hurt less if he had laughed. Instead, he just didn't see me. By the time I reached high school, I had learned that silence in our home wasn't neutrality. It was dismissal with a smile. When Tyler got into Harvard pre-med, they threw a garden party. There was catered sushi and champagne flutes and congratulatory banners. I had just qualified for the State Tech Invitational that same weekend. My mother smiled and said, "That's wonderful, sweetie. But we've already committed to hosting Tyler's guests. Maybe next time." I went to the invitational alone. I came back with a first-place trophy and a business card from a regional hospital rep who asked if I had ever considered commercializing my prototype. I left the trophy in my closet. No one asked how it went. I remember one night in particular. Tyler had just finished a clinical internship and was describing the surgery he observed over dinner. Everyone was leaning forward, proud and hungry for details. When he finished, my father said, "You're going to change lives, son." Then, after a pause, he turned to me. "And what about you, Reese?" I said I had been exploring encrypted messaging protocols for healthcare data, HIPAA-compliant, end-to-end communication between clinicians and patients. My voice was careful, precise. My mother tilted her head. "Is that like a chat room?" My father took another bite of asparagus. That was the rhythm of it. They didn't say I was failing. That would have required acknowledgement. They just left me out of the story entirely. At 18, I got into several excellent schools. They pushed for Columbia or Penn. I chose a small tech-forward program in Colorado instead. I wanted air, distance, a place where the Langley name didn't precede me like a shadow. My mother called it impulsive. My father called it short-sighted. I left anyway. That first year away felt like breathing for the first time. I was just Reese. No expectations to doctor or litigate. I met Joanna in our database systems class. She wore oversized hoodies and had the sharpest mind I'd ever seen. We bonded over late-night debugging and our shared allergy to traditional tracks. She'd left behind a legacy of dentists in Oregon. I'd walked away from the pressure cooker of Boston. We started sketching out an idea on napkins, what would later become the bones of Vitalis Sync, a platform that could actually fix communication breakdowns in patient care, the kind that cost people their lives. Joanna had watched her grandmother receive conflicting medication instructions from 2 different doctors in the same clinic. I'd seen my uncle nearly die from a delayed cancer diagnosis due to lost scans. We knew the system was broken. We believed we could fix one piece of it, and more than anything, we wanted to build it ourselves. By sophomore year, we were building a rough prototype in the garage of Joanna's cousin. We slept on a pull-out sofa and coded through the winter with gloves on. I called my parents once during that time to say I wouldn't be coming home for the holidays. "Too much going on," I said vaguely. My mother replied, "I hope you're not wasting your time on another side project. You know these things never last." She didn't ask what it was. I didn't offer. I had stopped trying by then. When we won a statewide tech challenge and received a small grant to build a pilot version of the app, my father sent me a text. "Congrats! You might consider paralegal work as a backup." I didn't respond. Instead, I printed out the grant approval letter and pinned it to the drywall above our server. That was my fuel. Years passed. The world outside our garage got bigger. We filed our LLC paperwork, landed our first pilot with a community clinic in Denver, secured a mentor from a health systems network who introduced us to their IT chief. Joanna's cousin celebrated with pizza and folding chairs in the driveway. I never told my family, not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted peace, because building something in silence had become my sanctuary, because if I ever did speak it aloud, I needed it to be on my terms, not theirs. And so I kept going, and they kept asking, "Are you still in between things?" And I kept saying, something like that. Until the night Madison Roth said my name like she'd just recognized a signature, and everything shifted. The strange thing about building something real is how long it can remain invisible, especially to the people who claim to know you best. After we launched our beta version of Vitalis Sync, Joanna and I moved into a cramped one-bedroom in the outskirts of Denver. It had peeling cabinets and a thermostat that never quite understood seasons, but it was ours. I took the bedroom, she took the couch. Our work took everything else. Every day began the same way: coffee, server logs, backlog tickets, calls with early clinicians. At night, we stared at screens until our eyes stung. I remember one time, we coded through a power outage using headlamps and a backup battery pack. That week, our cloud service bill cleared out my bank account. I pawned an old MacBook and never told Joanna. We lived in a kind of intensity that most people would call madness. But to us, it was clarity. Every hospital administrator who said, "This could save lives," fueled us. Every field nurse who begged for better tools pushed us forward. And through it all, I kept a folder on my desktop labeled "Never Sent." Inside were emails drafted to my parents, updates I almost shared, photos of our tiny launch party, a press clipping when a local clinic praised us for slashing internal communication times by 30%. The first check we received, signed, scanned, and held with shaking hands. But I never hit send. Because their silence had taught me the terms of our relationship. If it couldn't be framed in Ivy League credentials or white coats, it wasn't worth hearing, so I gave them nothing. Instead, I let them keep believing I was doing something with tech, that I was freelancing, that maybe I was still applying for analyst roles like they'd suggested. My mother once sent me a job listing at a corporate wellness company. She added a postscript. It has a steady salary and they offer yoga on site. I didn't even open the link. The thing is, it wasn't spite. I wasn't trying to punish them. I was protecting the only thing I had built that felt purely mine. Our first big break came during a healthcare innovation conference in Seattle. We had applied on a whim. Joanna made our pitch deck in Canva at 3 a.m. I borrowed a blazer from our upstairs neighbor. We stood in front of a room full of decision makers and talked about what we saw every day: confusion, delay, risk, because doctors and nurses still relied on fax machines and hallway conversations. We walked away with the Judge's Choice Award, a $25,000 grant, and a line of people asking for demo calls. Joanna cried in the elevator. I didn't. I just looked down at my phone, half waiting to text someone. But there was no one I wanted to call. That same weekend, Tyler's engagement photos went up online. His smile wide, Madison glowing beside him. My mother sent me the link, no caption, just the photos. I replied with a heart emoji. They never asked where I was. They never asked what I was doing. The less I said, the less they had to misunderstand. After the Seattle event, we raised our first seed round, $2.8 million from two angels and a niche healthcare VC. The terms were rough. The runway was short. But it was the first time someone outside our circle looked at our work and said, yes, this matters. We grew fast. Hired our first engineer, a 22-year-old genius named Max, who had dropped out of Carnegie Mellon and could code circles around us. Then came Serena, our UX lead, and Aaron, our compliance guy, who kept Post-its on his coffee mug to remember HIPAA updates. Vitalis Sync became a living thing. Hospitals started integrating us into critical care workflows. We weren't fixing the whole system, but we were unclogging the parts that made people suffer unnecessarily. I'd sometimes Google my parents' names just to see what world they were still living in. My father was quoted in legal journals. My mother gave keynote lectures on neuroethics. Tyler had started his residency at a major hospital in Boston. There were articles, interviews, profiles. They still sent out family newsletters every year. I was always listed as, Reese is exploring some exciting ventures in tech. It was almost funny, like I was on a permanent internship. At 30, I flew first class for the first time, paid for by a client hospital in San Francisco. I sat in that seat, wine in hand, thinking how surreal it was. My parents had no idea. They still called to remind me about health insurance and 401(k)s, as if I hadn't read term sheets and negotiated equity. I had passed them. And yet, I still felt like that teenager sliding code under a newspaper, hoping someone might look up. Then came Madison, or rather, an email with her name in the header. It was clean, professional. Dear Miss Langley, it began, I'm reaching out from Novacore's strategic growth team to explore potential partnership opportunities with your platform, Vitalis Sync. At first, I didn't make the connection. Roth was a common name. She hadn't mentioned Tyler. And why would she? I forwarded it to Joanna with a neutral comment. We scheduled a call. Then I saw her LinkedIn profile. Director of Strategy Novacore Health Systems, MBA from Wharton, public speaker, advocate for digital health equity, engaged to Tyler Langley. There it was, clear as day. I reread the email 3 times. Joanna was excited. Novacore's huge. If they're interested, it means we're finally being seen. I didn't reply. Instead, I sat with it. Not because I was afraid, but because fate has a cruel sense of symmetry. The woman about to marry my brother, the same brother who once told me maybe I should get into graphic design instead, was now trying to buy my company, without even knowing who I was. I didn't tell Joanna. I didn't tell anyone. For 6 weeks, we exchanged polite emails, scheduled discovery calls, and sent over sanitized demo decks. I kept my camera off during early calls. Let Serena take lead on most pitches. My name was in the documents, yes, but tucked at the bottom, as always. I'd become a myth in my own company, the founder who stayed off stage. I never wanted the spotlight. I just wanted the system to work better. But as the engagement dinner approached and the Novacor deal moved to a second term sheet, I felt something shifting. It wasn't nerves. It was inevitability. At some point, Madison would connect the dots. At some point, my name, spoken aloud, would do what all my silence had not. And this time, I wouldn't flinch. I'd let the truth land, where it belonged. In the week leading up to the engagement dinner, my mother called 3 times. Each call was short, brisk, and dressed in civility. "Reese, make sure you wear something elegant. Madison's family is very accomplished. We want to present well." She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask if I'd be bringing anyone. She just wanted to ensure I wouldn't embarrass them with my usual black turtlenecks and unstructured attitude, as she once called it during Tyler's white coat ceremony. "Of course," I said, eyes on my laptop screen, scanning a data security audit. "I'll find something appropriate." "Not just appropriate," she corrected, "polished." There it was, the Langley standard. I chose a fitted black dress, simple, sleek, strategic. It wasn't to impress anyone. It was to anchor myself, to remind me that I didn't have to perform, didn't have to shrink. I didn't need their version of power. I was power. The engagement dinner was held at the Eaves, a glass-walled Michelin darling perched above the river in downtown Boston. The kind of place where every champagne flute was polished to reflection, and every smile carried the faint tension of money. I arrived precisely on time, not early enough to be roped into arranging name cards, not late enough to make a statement, just there, solid. Tyler greeted me with his usual grin, a flash of teeth too perfect to be real. "Glad you made it, Reese." His hug was warm, performed, the kind that said, "See, I'm a good brother." But his eyes darted away quickly, as if unsure where to land. He introduced me to Madison with the confidence of someone who thought he was presenting 2 strangers. "Madison, this is my sister, Reese." Madison extended a perfectly manicured hand. "It's so great to meet you. I've heard—" Well, not much, honestly. "But Tyler says you're in tech?" I smiled, neutral. "Something like that." She laughed politely and turned to greet another guest. She didn't recognize me. Not yet. The seating chart placed me next to a second cousin and across from our father. My mother sat 2 seats away, locked in a conversation about vineyard real estate with Madison's aunt. Dinner began with the usual theater, champagne poured like ceremony, toasts timed like choreography. My father stood to brag about Tyler's latest research on neuroplasticity. My mother dabbed her eyes as she recalled the day he dissected a frog with such precision in 8th grade that his teacher sent home a letter. No one mentioned me. No one even paused long enough for me to be an afterthought. Between the first and second course, my cousin leaned over and asked if I was still between jobs. I offered a soft smile. "I'm in healthcare technology." "Oh," she said, drawing out the syllable. "Like, an app?" "Something like that," I said again. Across the table, I saw Madison glance at me. Not casually, curiously. Her brow furrowed slightly, her lips parted, as if a thought had floated to the surface but hadn't quite formed. Then dessert arrived, and the room shifted into that soft, full-bellied quiet that follows expensive soufflés. That's when it happened. Madison's voice cut through the ambient string quartet. "Wait," she said aloud, eyes narrowing on me. "Langley? Your name is Reese Langley?" Tyler laughed. "Of course it is. She's my sister." Madison turned slowly, setting her spoon down with care. "Reese Langley? Of Vitalis Sync?" I held her gaze. "Yes." She blinked once. "You're the founder?" I nodded. "Co-founder and head of product." The room froze. It was surreal, how silence can feel louder than any gasp. My mother stiffened, My father's wine glass paused in midair. Even the server stopped pouring. Tyler stared at me, blank. Wait, what are you talking about? Reese works in tech support or something. Madison looked at him like he'd just spoken a foreign language. No, Reese Langley is the co-founder of Vitalis Sync, the platform Novacore has been negotiating to acquire for the past 6 weeks. It's considered one of the most innovative healthcare communication systems on the market. She turned to me again, slower this time. You've been on every internal strategy call, haven't you? I nodded. I've been present. Tyler looked as if he'd been slapped sideways. You never said anything. You never asked. He opened his mouth, closed it. No rebuttal formed. My father finally spoke. Wait, Reese, this software, it's yours? Yes, I said calmly. We started it in college. It's used in over 300 hospitals now. We're finalizing an acquisition with Novacore, unless something changes. My mother's jaw tightened. And you didn't think to tell us? You never thought to ask. That was the shift. That was the turning point no toast could prepare them for. Around the table, relatives who had barely acknowledged me earlier were suddenly wide-eyed. Their body language shifted. My uncle leaned in to whisper something about investments. My cousin asked if I knew anyone at Stanford's med school looking for UX consultants. My mother said twice that she always knew I had potential with computers. I didn't respond, not to any of it. I didn't need to. Because something far more satisfying had already happened. The silence they had blanketed me in for years had cracked open. And the noise now rushing through? That wasn't pride. That was realization and regret. Tyler, to his credit, didn't try to spin it. He just sat there, blinking, his fingers resting on the stem of his glass, like he wasn't sure if he was still holding it. After dessert, as the guests began to drift into smaller conversations and photos, Madison found me near the floor-to-ceiling windows. I owe you an apology, she said, voice low. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. You didn't, I replied. That moment was always going to happen. It just happened in front of a nicer view. She gave a soft laugh. Well, for what it's worth, your platform has saved lives. Our internal teams talk about it constantly. I understand now why they're so protective of your involvement. I looked at her, not as the woman marrying my brother, but as the strategist who had unknowingly walked into my story from the wrong side. Thank you, I said, and meant it. She hesitated. Does Tyler really not know? No, I said, but that's not entirely his fault. Her brows rose, but she didn't press, and that I appreciated. That night, I walked back to my car without saying goodbye to anyone else. I drove through the city with the windows cracked, letting the wind carry away the residue of that room. For years, I'd imagined what it would feel like for them to finally see me. And now that they had, it didn't change a thing, because I wasn't waiting for their applause. I had already learned how to walk without it. The next morning, my phone lit up before the sun did. The first message came from my mother. Mom, brunch, Drake Hotel, tomorrow, 11 a.m. Please be on time. The period at the end of the message was louder than any exclamation point. Then came my father. Dad, proud of you. Let's catch up. Hours later, a shorter one from Tyler. Tyler, why didn't you tell me? That one I stared at the longest. I didn't reply. Not right away. I wasn't sure which part I was supposed to explain first, the building or the burying. The next day, I arrived at the Drake 10 minutes early. I always did hate being the last to show up when I knew the room was already halfway full of assumptions. They were already seated. My father in his gray weekend blazer that still carried the stiffness of courtrooms. My mother in a silk blouse and the pearls she reserved for events that felt just personal enough to pretend. She rose first. Darling, she said, the word more formality than affection. You look lovely. My father offered an awkward half-stand. You look well. We all sat down as if this was a deposition. There was no menu discussion, no casual chatter, just the low clink of silver and water glasses being filled by a waiter far too professional to comment on the tension cutting through the linen. My mother began. "I've been reading everything," she said. "The funding rounds, the user growth, the award from the Health Systems Innovation Board. It's remarkable." She paused, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something like discomfort. "But Reese," she continued, "why didn't you share any of this with us?" I folded my napkin into my lap, took a slow sip of coffee, and looked her directly in the eyes. "Because the last time I tried, you told me to apply for a receptionist role." My father sat back. "That's not fair," he said quickly. "We were trying to help." "No," I said. "You were trying to fix something that wasn't broken." The silence after that felt glass thin. One wrong word, and it would all shatter. My mother inhaled sharply. "We didn't understand," she said. "The tech world, it moves so fast. It seemed unstable." "And medicine doesn't?" I asked gently. "Law doesn't?" "That's different," she replied. "Those are structured, proven." "I know," I nodded. "That's what scared you. I chose something you couldn't control." My father's face, usually a mask of mild condescension, softened. "But you're clearly brilliant. We always knew that." "No," I said, not coldly, just honestly. "You knew what you wanted me to be. That's not the same as knowing me." The waiter brought our food. None of us touched it. I stirred cream into my coffee, trying to keep my voice even. I spent years building something I believed in, and every time I tried to share it, it felt like shouting into a storm. So eventually, I stopped trying. My mother blinked. "We thought you were lost." "I wasn't," I said. "I just wasn't yours to direct anymore." That silence? It held. For the first time in years, it didn't feel dismissive. It felt uncertain, fragile, but real. "We love you," my mother said finally quietly. "I know," I replied, "but love without respect doesn't feel like love. It feels like expectation." My father looked down at his plate, like the word respect was a foreign currency he hadn't realized he needed to spend. The rest of brunch was quieter. The tension thinned into something more porous. They asked questions, real ones, about Joanna, about how we got our first clinic on board, about why we turned down 2 acquisition offers before Novacor. My mother admitted she tried reading a blog on startup fundraising, but didn't understand most of the acronyms. "It was like reading Greek," she said. "All the talk of runways and burn rates." I offered a small smile. "It's a different world," she nodded. "I suppose it is." Near the end, my father said, "We never meant to make you feel small." "You didn't mean to," I said. "But you did." He looked like a man reckoning with a mirror he didn't know had been there all along. When we stood to leave, there were no grand hugs, no sudden declarations of redemption, just a suggestion that we do this again sometime. And that, in its own quiet way, was enough. A few nights later, Tyler showed up at my apartment. He brought a bottle of Cabernet and a bakery box. "I tried to bake," he said, sheepish. "It went badly, so I bought backups." We sat on the floor, backs against the couch, the skyline of Boston flickering through the windows like distant fireflies. Just like when we were kids, sneaking snacks and building Lego empires while the adults debated policy and publishing. He didn't waste time. "I need to say this," he said. "I'm sorry." I looked over, surprised by the directness. "I believed what Mom and Dad believed," he continued, "that you were floundering, that you were avoiding structure, that you missed your shot." He shook his head. "But you weren't lost. You were building something they couldn't see. And I didn't ask. That's on me." I nodded slowly. "You weren't the only one. But I'm the one here," he said. We raised our glasses. "To the black sheep," he said. "To the sheep that built an empire," I replied. We laughed, low and honest. It echoed in the stillness. And in that moment, something shifted, not in them, but in me. For so long, I had carried the weight of their indifference, like it was mine to prove wrong. But now, with the truth out in the open, I realized something simpler. I had already become everything I needed to be, with or without them. 6 months later, the deal with Novacor closed. Vitalis Sync joined one of the most powerful health tech portfolios in the world. Joanna took over global strategy. I became head of innovation, leading a team that now scaled our platform across continents. My office overlooked the same river that ran beside the eaves. But that wasn't the real shift. The real shift was my mother sending me a screenshot of a Women in Tech article and asking, "Have you met her? She reminds me of you." It was my father sitting through a full product demo, nodding, not because he understood every detail, but because he finally believed it mattered. It was Tyler casually mentioning that he quoted one of my white papers during grand rounds. And it was me, no longer waiting for applause, no longer shrinking, hosting monthly dinners for young women in STEM, telling them that even when no one claps, their work still counts. Recognition fades, conviction stays. And legacy? Legacy is not what they say after you succeed. It's what you build when they're not looking. It didn't happen all at once. The shift, I mean. After the deal closed and the headlines settled, life didn't morph into some glittering reconciliation. There was no cinematic family dinner where everyone apologized in unison. My mother didn't start texting heart emojis, and my father didn't suddenly understand the difference between front-end and back-end development. But there were moments. Soft, halting, imperfect moments that sounded a little like respect. It started with a forwarded article from my mother. The subject line read, "Impressive young woman, reminds me of someone." No punctuation. But she had highlighted a quote about women in male-dominated tech industries. Then came a photo from my father. Him standing in front of the Vitalis Sync banner at a healthcare conference. "Saw this today," he wrote. No commentary. But the fact that he took the photo at all was something. And Tyler, he became the quiet bridge. He sent little things, screenshots of internal memos where Vitalis was mentioned, a link to a medical journal that cited our platform's impact on inpatient discharge delays. Once, he forwarded a Zoom screenshot from Grand Rounds. "I quoted you today," the message said. No emojis. Just that. It was never dramatic, never performative, but it was real. One evening, after another 12-hour day packed with product reviews and late calls with our Asia-Pacific team, I stood by my office window, watching the city lights flicker below. Vitalis had grown beyond anything Joanna and I could have imagined in that garage. We had onboarded 700 hospitals. We'd been translated into 6 languages. I'd been invited to speak at panels I used to sneak into the back row of. But what filled me most wasn't scale or valuation. It was the stillness, the peace of knowing I had built something no one could take away. Not because they couldn't try, but because I no longer needed to be understood to be valid. That was what all those years had been for, quietly strengthening a core that didn't depend on recognition. And once you have that, everything else is bonus. That fall, I started something small, something personal. Once a month, I opened my apartment to a handful of young women in tech. Students, new grads, founders in the early scrappy phase. We didn't network. We didn't pitch. We sat on the floor with pizza and red wine and talked about the quiet parts of building, the loneliness, the doubt, the moments when you wonder if you're delusional for believing in something no one else sees yet. One night, after most of the group had left, a girl named Liana lingered by the window. She was 17, a high school senior, who'd come with her older cousin. She looked nervous, the way I used to feel around anyone who seemed sure of themselves. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." She looked down, twisting the ring on her finger. "Do you ever wish they believed in you earlier? Your family, I mean. Wouldn't that have made things easier?" The question landed gently, not accusing, not bitter, just curious in the way only someone still hoping for belief can ask. I thought about it, and then I told her the truth. "Sometimes," I said, "it would have made things warmer, but maybe not better." She frowned. "How so?" "If they had believed in me from the beginning," I said slowly, "I might have built this for them, to prove them right, to please them, to be worthy." I turned to face her. But because they didn't, I had to build it for myself. And that difference, it saved me. She was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. "There's a certain kind of freedom that comes when no one claps, when you learn to build anyway, when you stop performing, stop begging to be noticed, and start choosing yourself. That kind of success? It doesn't glitter, it grounds you. Weeks later, my mother invited me to a small dinner party she was hosting. No pressure, she said, which was her way of applying pressure. I declined, kindly. I'm traveling for work, I said. She didn't push, just replied, next time then. Maybe you can tell your father more about what you're building next. He's curious. It used to be that my silence was interpreted as failure. Now it was treated like mystery. Progress, I suppose. Not long after, I found a small envelope in my mailbox. No stamp, just my name in my mother's looping cursive. Inside was a photo. Me and Tyler at the engagement dinner, snapped candidly. I was mid-smile. He was looking at me. On the back, in her handwriting, I didn't know. I see it now. That was all. And strangely, that was enough. Because it wasn't a request for a second chance. It was an acknowledgement. And sometimes that's all you need. Years ago, I thought the goal was to be seen, to be heard, to be invited into the spotlight with everyone else. But I've learned the quiet truth. Recognition is nice. It's clean. It photographs well. But conviction, the kind that grows in silence, the kind you carry through empty rooms and long nights and holidays alone, that's what lasts. That's what builds legacies. And as I stood by my window again, city below, sky above, I smiled. Not because they finally saw me, but because I never needed them to. Not really. Some truths don't explode. They arrive in quiet moments, subtle and persistent, like sunrise filtering through blinds. That's how it came to me. Not in the boardroom, not at a press event, but in a still kitchen, pouring tea for myself at midnight, realizing I no longer needed anyone else to see what I had built. I already had. A few weeks after the NovaCore acquisition finalized, I received an envelope in the mail. No stamp, just my name written in familiar cursive. Inside was a single photo. Me and Tyler at the engagement dinner. He was laughing. I was mid-smile. Someone must have caught the shot without us noticing. On the back, my mother had written, I didn't know, I see it now. There was no follow-up, no paragraph, no call, and strangely, it was enough. Because I didn't need an apology, I didn't want a rewrite. I just wanted the record corrected. In the months that followed, I didn't chase the spotlight. I didn't post on LinkedIn. I didn't suddenly become more available for brunches or holidays. But I stopped shrinking. I answered truthfully when asked. I let them see finally, without softening the edges. Tyler became the bridge. He started sending me links, mentions of Vitalis Sync in hospital newsletters, screenshots of internal systems that had finally onboarded. He didn't say much, just sent the proof, quiet, like me. One evening, he invited me over for dinner. Just us, he said. No speeches. I'll cook. It'll be a mess. It was. He overcooked the pasta, forgot to salt the sauce. We laughed through it. At one point, he said, I thought you were lost. But maybe you were just out of reach. I didn't correct him. He was close enough. A few weeks later, I received a message from my mother. Mom, brunch this Sunday? No pressure. Just a meal, no speeches, I promise. I said yes. She was already seated when I arrived. No pearls, no lecture voice, just a sweater and a small notepad beside her plate. She'd written down questions, real ones, about how we built our first version, how we protected user privacy, how we scaled without fracturing our team. She didn't pretend to know the terms. She didn't fake understanding. She just listened. When the check came, she reached for it. I let her. And when we stepped outside, she touched my arm. You've done something extraordinary, she said. I nodded. Yes, I have. She didn't flinch. That was new. That week, I hosted another mentorship dinner, something I'd started doing monthly. 5 or 6 young women in tech, sometimes more. We'd sit on the floor, eat whatever was easiest, and talk about the parts of building no one posts about. Imposter syndrome, late-night doubt, the feeling of being invisible. One girl, Liana, asked me, Do you ever wish they had believed in you earlier? I thought about it. Sometimes, I said, but if they had, maybe I would have done all this to please them. She frowned. Isn't that good? I shook my head. No, because then it wouldn't be mine. That's the thing no one tells you about building in silence. It teaches you to hear your own voice. And once you've heard it clearly, without interference, without applause, nothing and no one can take that away. One night, standing by my window, I looked out at the lights of the city. So much had changed. Vitalis had grown. We were global now. My name was in decks, in articles, sometimes even spoken out loud. But the real shift wasn't external. It was that I didn't need the applause anymore. Recognition is fleeting. Conviction stays. And legacy? Legacy is what remains when everyone who doubted you finally leaves the room, and you're still standing, still building, still sure. I wasn't waiting to be seen. I already was.